The first thing I noticed when I came back to myself was the beeping, a slow, steady rhythm somewhere above my head, the kind of sound that pulls you up from the dark whether you want to come or not. My mouth tasted like metal and rubber. The fluorescent light behind my eyelids was white and flat. For a few seconds I didn't know where I was, and then I remembered the prep, the drive over, the nurse who had told me to count backward from 10 while she taped the IV to the back of my hand. I made it to 7. I was 63 years old and I had just had a colonoscopy. Routine. That was the word my doctor used when he scheduled it. Routine screening, Martin. Nothing to worry about. I hadn't been worried. I had done the prep the night before, complained about it to my wife over the phone while she was at her book club, driven myself to the outpatient center at 6:15 in the morning, and signed my name to 3 different forms without reading them. I was not the kind of man who worried about routine things. The sedation they use for a colonoscopy is called propofol. What most people don't realize is that it doesn't put you fully under the way general anesthesia does. It's a twilight sedation. They give you enough to make you compliant and comfortable and foggy, and most people don't remember a thing. But metabolism varies. Age, body weight, liver function, and sometimes, without any warning, a person comes back early. That's what happened to me. I was aware before I could move. That's the strangest part to explain to people, when I've tried to explain it later. My brain woke up before my body remembered how to respond to it. I could hear, and I could understand what I was hearing, but my limbs felt like they were wrapped in wet concrete, and my eyes were still closed. And something in me, instinct, maybe, or whatever part of the brain works faster than conscious thought, told me to stay still and listen before I let anyone know I was awake. My wife's voice was the first thing I recognized. She was standing somewhere to my left, close enough that I could hear her clearly. She was speaking quietly, the way she spoke when she didn't want to be overheard. I had heard that voice before, over the years. She used it on the phone with her sister when they were discussing someone's marriage falling apart. She used it in restaurant booths when she wanted to tell me something about the couple at the next table. It was a voice I associated with information being passed between 2 people who had agreed it should not travel further. "He's still under," she said. "I have maybe another 20 minutes. A pause. She was listening to whoever was on the other end. "I know what he said. I was there, Daniel. I'm telling you it doesn't matter what he said, because by the time Dr. Okafor submits the evaluation, the conversation we're having right now won't even be relevant anymore." I did not move. I became very interested in continuing not to move. Another pause. Longer this time. "The documents are ready. I had them notarized on Tuesday. All we need is for the evaluation to come back the way Renata said it would. After that, I have full authority. Full authority, Daniel. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" She laughed, softly. It was a sound I had heard 1,000 times in 31 years of marriage. It landed differently now. "He won't fight it. You know how he gets. He'll be confused and upset, and then he'll trust me to handle it because that's what Martin does. That's what he's always done." The call ended. I heard her heels on the tile, moving toward the window. I kept my breathing slow and even. I had been a civil engineer for 34 years. I had managed construction sites and regulatory agencies and city contracts and neighborhood boards and every kind of human conflict that comes with building things in places where people have to live. I knew how to keep my face still when my mind was moving fast. I lay there for another 4 minutes before I let the nurse see me blink. My wife was beside me when I woke up, holding a paper cup of apple juice and wearing the expression she always wore in situations where she wanted people to think she was the most devoted person in the room. She rubbed my forearm. She called me honey. The nurse asked me how I felt, and I said groggy, which was not untrue. On the drive home, my wife told me about a neighbor's new deck, a sale at the grocery store, something her friend had said about a restaurant downtown. I watched the road and said, in the right places, and thought about the word evaluation. I thought about Dr. Okafor. She was a geriatric psychiatrist. I had been referred to her 4 months earlier, and at the time I hadn't questioned it. My primary care physician had mentioned some concerns about my memory. I had forgotten a lunch appointment, left a pot on the stove, misplaced my car keys twice in 1 week. Normal things that happen to people who are busy and getting older. But my wife had been with me at that appointment, and she had said gently that she'd noticed a few things too, and that she thought an evaluation might ease both of our minds. I had agreed. I trusted her judgment in medical matters the way I trusted her to manage the household finances, the way I had trusted her with most of the things in our daily life that required sustained attention and organization. She was capable and detail-oriented. I told people that about her. I was proud of it. I thought about the Word documents. I thought about Daniel. Daniel was my business partner. Had been, for 18 years, the man who co-managed the investment portfolio we had built together after I retired from engineering, buying and renovating commercial properties across 3 counties. We had started with 1 warehouse and a handshake. By the time I was 60, we had 11 properties and a management company with 6 employees. Daniel handled the leasing and the day-to-day operations. I handled the capital decisions and the banking relationships. We trusted each other the way men trust each other when they have made money together and never once had a reason not to. I thought about the way my wife had laughed on that phone call. That night, after my wife went to sleep, I sat in my home office with the door closed and pulled up our joint investment account online. I had the password written in a leather notebook I kept in my desk drawer, something my wife didn't know about because she handled the finances on the household side, and I handled them on the investment side, and we had kept those 2 worlds mostly separate for the sake of simplicity. I typed in the credentials and stared at the screen for a long time. The account balance was $340,000 lower than the last time I had checked it. I was very careful about what I did next. I did not call Daniel. I did not confront my wife. I did not Google anything on that computer. I closed the account window, put the notebook back in the drawer, and went to bed. In the morning, I called my daughter. She was 34, living in Portland, a paralegal who had been trying to get into law school for 2 years. We were close in the way that fathers and daughters are close after a difficult beginning. Her mother and I had divorced when she was 9, and there had been years of distance and miscommunication and hurt that neither of us had known how to name. And then one day when she was 26, she had driven up to see me unannounced, and we had sat in the kitchen for 4 hours and said every single thing we had never said. And after that, we were close in a way that felt like it had been built by hand from the ground up, which was the kind of close I valued most. She answered on the second ring. "Dad," she said, "what's wrong? What makes you think something's wrong? You never call before 9. I told her what I had heard. I told her all of it, including the part about the evaluation and the documents and the way my wife had said full authority twice, as if the phrase had a taste she wanted to keep in her mouth. I told her about the account balance. I kept my voice level. I was a civil engineer. I built things that had to hold weight. There was a silence on the other end that lasted long enough that I thought I'd lost the call. "Dad," she said finally, "I need to tell you something." She had been wanting to say it for 2 months, she told me. She had been trying to find the right way. 6 weeks earlier, she had come to visit, and my wife had been cold in a way that felt calculated, the kind of cold that is meant to communicate something. And on the second evening of that visit, my wife had taken my daughter aside while I was grilling on the back deck and told her, quietly and with great apparent concern, that she was worried about me, that she had noticed some significant cognitive changes, that she had consulted with a specialist and things were progressing faster than she had hoped. She had asked my daughter not to say anything to me because she didn't want me to feel frightened. She had used the word progressing. "I didn't know what to think," my daughter said. "You seemed completely fine to me. You seemed exactly like you." But she said that was part of it, that people in the early stages could still seem normal in short visits. Her voice was tight. "And I've been sitting with that for 6 weeks, Dad. Telling myself I was imagining things. Telling myself she loved you. She does love something," I said. "I'm just not sure it's me." I spent the next 3 weeks operating as if nothing had changed, which was the hardest thing I have ever done. I made my wife coffee in the mornings. I went to a follow-up appointment with Dr. Okafor and answered her questions the same way I had answered them before, carefully, honestly, completely. I did not know yet what was in the evaluation she was preparing. I did not know how compromised she was, or whether she was compromised at all, or whether my wife's confidence about what that evaluation would come back as was based on something real, or something she had simply convinced herself of. I did not know enough yet. So I paid attention. What I found, once I started looking, was a kind of geometry I had been living inside of, without being able to see its shape. The forgotten appointments my wife had mentioned to my doctor. I checked my calendar. I had not forgotten them. They had been removed from the shared calendar we both had access to on our phones. The pot I had left on the stove, my wife had been the last one to cook that evening. I remembered now. I remembered that we had eaten late, and she had made soup, and I had cleaned up, and she had come into the kitchen an hour later, alarmed, saying she had noticed the burner was still on. I had believed her because I had no reason not to. The missing car keys twice in 1 week. I had found them in my coat pocket the first time, not where I usually kept them, and assumed I had been distracted. The second time they turned up in a kitchen drawer that I never used. My daughter found a forensic accountant through a lawyer she trusted, a woman who had handled several elder financial abuse cases in the Pacific Northwest. The accountant was in our state. Within 10 days of going through the documentation I had gathered from the investment account, quarterly statements going back 4 years, transfer records, the management company's books, she had identified a pattern of withdrawals and inter-account transfers that had moved just under $410,000 from our shared investment portfolio into an LLC that neither I nor the company officially owned. The LLC had 2 principals. My wife was one of them. Daniel was the other. I want to be precise about what I felt when I read that report, because I think people expect a certain kind of reaction, and what I actually experienced was more complicated. There was anger, yes, and it was the cold kind, the kind that doesn't shake your hands or raise your voice, but instead sits in your chest like ballast and makes you very, very steady. But underneath the anger was something else that I didn't have a name for right away. It took me a few days to understand what it was. It was grief. Not for the money, for the 31 years, for the man I had been in this marriage, the man who trusted, who believed that being easy and generous and reliable was the same as being safe. I grieved for how long I had spent building something that was being disassembled from the inside. I also want to be honest about the evaluation. When I finally got access to a draft of Dr. Okafor's report through my attorney, it was not as straightforward as I had feared. She was not, as far as anyone could determine, a corrupt professional. What she had done was rely too heavily on the history provided by my wife, the incidents she had described, the pattern of behavior she had characterized, and had weighted her assessment accordingly. She had spoken with my primary care physician, who had spoken with my wife. The portrait that had been painted for her was not a fabrication from whole cloth. It was a series of real brushstrokes applied at wrong angles by a woman who had been preparing this canvas for a long time. The evaluation was not yet finalized. My attorney moved to have a second, independent evaluation conducted immediately, with no input from my wife. I passed that evaluation without a single flag. The morning my attorney filed the initial civil complaint, I was sitting in my home office when my wife came to the door. She looked at me the way she had looked at me for 31 years, with the expression of a woman who has always known slightly more than the situation calls for. She asked me what I was working on. "Some paperwork," I said. She nodded. She left. By noon she had spoken to Daniel. By 3 in the afternoon her personal attorney had called mine. By evening she had moved into the guest bedroom, and the house was very quiet in a way that felt less like emptiness and more like the silence after a long sound finally stops. The civil proceedings took 11 months. There are things about that period that I will keep private, not because I am ashamed, but because some pain is not for public consumption. There were depositions. There were days when I sat across a conference table from the woman I had married and tried to reconcile the person in front of me with every version of her I had known. There were conversations with my daughter that I will be grateful for until I die. She flew out 3 times. She sat with me in the kitchen the same way she had sat with me when she was 26, and we talked, and the talking was the thing that kept the ground solid under my feet. What came out in the proceedings was more thorough than I had allowed myself to fully imagine. The relationship between my wife and my business partner had begun, according to the financial records, approximately 5 years before I overheard that phone call. The money transfers had begun 2 years after that. The plan, and it was a plan, documented in emails that neither of them had thought to delete from an account. My attorney subpoenaed was for my wife to obtain legal guardianship over me on the basis of cognitive decline, at which point she would have full control over our shared assets, including my portion of the investment portfolio and the commercial properties. They had not expected guardianship proceedings to be necessary for another year or 2. They had been moving methodically. What they had not accounted for was propofol metabolizing faster in a 63-year-old man with a high-functioning liver. Daniel settled out of court. The terms required him to return the full amount transferred through the LLC, plus a penalty that covered my legal fees and then some. He also lost his role in the management company and his stake in 2 of the 11 properties we had built together. I do not know where he is now. I am not interested in knowing. My wife's situation was more complicated. The civil case resolved in my favor. The criminal matter, which was filed separately by the state attorney's office after reviewing the financial evidence and the emails, resulted in charges of financial exploitation of an elderly person and conspiracy. She pleaded guilty to a reduced charge. She received 3 years of probation, was ordered to complete 200 hours of community service, and was required to make full financial restitution as a condition of the plea agreement. The divorce was finalized 4 months before the criminal case closed. She did not go to prison. I have sat with my feelings about that for a long time. I have not arrived at peace with it. Exactly. But I have arrived at something I can live with, which is the understanding that justice rarely delivers what we imagine it will when we are sitting in the dark at 2 a.m. running through scenarios. What it delivered to me was the return of my name, my competence, my story told by my own mouth in a room full of people who had to listen. There is one more thing. Dr. Okafor reached out to me through my attorney after the case concluded. She asked if I would be willing to meet with her, not professionally, but as a courtesy. I agreed, because I am a man who believes in understanding how things went wrong if you are ever going to build something better. We met for coffee. She was a serious woman, younger than I had expected, and she sat across from me with the expression of someone who has done a genuine reckoning. She told me she had reviewed everything. She told me that she had revised her intake protocols for subsequent patients to require corroborating evidence from a minimum of 2 independent sources before family-reported behavioral history was incorporated into a cognitive assessment. She told me she was sorry. I told her I accepted the apology. I meant it. The properties are still operating. I brought in a new co-manager, a woman I had known professionally for 15 years who had the kind of attention to detail that made me sleep well at night. The portfolio is stable. I sold 2 of the smaller commercial buildings last spring at a number that would have made me very happy at any other point in my life and made me feel mostly relieved that the chapter was truly closing. My daughter is in law school now. She got in on her 3rd application. She called me at 6 a.m. when she found out, and she was crying, and I stood in my kitchen in my socks and I was crying too, and neither of us said anything for almost a full minute, because some moments are too large for words, and it is better to just let them take up their proper space. She is studying elder law. She told me that the year I spent fighting that case was the reason she changed her focus. She told me she had watched me navigate it, the depositions, the financial forensics, the second evaluation, the months of keeping my face composed while my life was being examined from every angle, and she had thought, this is what I want to do. Protect people like him. Give people like him the tools to fight back before they are already underwater. I told her I was proud. I tell her that every time I talk to her. I live alone now, in a house that is quieter than it used to be, but mine in a way it never quite felt before. I make coffee in the morning and sit on the back deck and watch the light come across the yard. I call my daughter twice a week. I take my car to the same mechanic I have been going to for 12 years, who charges me fairly and doesn't oversell me on things I don't need. I go to the same diner every Saturday morning and eat the same eggs, and read the paper and talk to the same people who have been sitting at the counter since before I ever walked in there. I am not angry anymore, most days. What I am is clear-eyed. I spent 31 years being a man who didn't look too closely at certain things because I believed that trust was the same as evidence. I know better now. I am not a suspicious man. I don't want to be that. I never wanted to become that, but I understand the difference now between trust that has been tested and trust that has simply never been challenged. One of those is a foundation. The other is just an assumption you've been lucky enough not to have to examine yet. I still think about the recovery room, the beeping above my head, the particular quality of the light behind my closed eyelids, the way my body came back before my face did, and the decision I made in those first conscious seconds, before I had any idea what I was deciding, to stay still and listen. I don't know what would have happened if I had moved, if I had blinked, or shifted, or made any of the normal noises a person makes when they wake up from sedation. She would have ended the call. Whatever else she was planning to say would have gone unsaid. And I would have gone home and had soup and watched television and continued to be the man I was, a man whose keys kept disappearing, whose appointments kept falling off the calendar, whose wife was quietly and methodically building a cage around him, one small incident at a time. The sedation wore off at the exact right moment. That is not a small thing. I have thought about it on the back deck in the mornings, holding my coffee with both hands. The strange, precise luck of it. The way the body sometimes knows what it needs before the mind has been told. I am not a religious man, but I am an engineer, and an engineer knows that some tolerances are so tight that a fraction of a millimeter in any direction changes everything. The margin between the life I was heading toward and the life I am living now was 20 minutes of sedation, wearing off early. 20 minutes that gave me everything back. My daughter calls it justice. She says it with the kind of clarity that only lawyers in training and people who have been genuinely wronged can fully sustain. I appreciate that about her. I appreciate the way she doesn't want me to soften it, to make it more palatable, to wrap it in the kind of language that makes difficult truths easier for everyone else to sit with. What I call it, on the back deck in the morning, is mine. This story is mine, these years are mine, this house, this coffee, this light across this yard mine. They tried to take my mind first, because they knew that without that, everything else would follow. They chose the cruelest architecture they could find, a man doubting his own memory, a man watching the people around him gently confirm his worst fear about himself, and they built inside it with patience and care. But I woke up early, and I did not go back to sleep.